Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional from Hong Kong, Soundari Mukherjea. Soundari, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Ashutosh. I'm really honored to be part of this podcast.
Thank you. I think we're delighted to have you. So Soundari is an organizational consultant. She's a business storytelling coach. She's a faculty member, a mentor, a facilitator, visual thinker, and speaker. She is the Chief Everything Officer at Soundbites 11, and she earlier worked in the corporate world, which was in Unilever, ANZ, and others. So Soundari, let's start by asking you about your own journey in brief.
Yeah. No, first of all, I'm so in awe of your work and how prolific you're in publishing. One of my beliefs is about, thinking of how are you serving the world? How are you releasing what is genuine in you so that the world can benefit? And I think you're doing that with your books and your podcast and everything else. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think life can only be understood by looking backward, but we have to live looking forward. I think that's Kierkegaard's thing. And it's been a portfolio career. I read this. Sometimes you read one of these articles and it just says, oh my God, they've put my thoughts in paper kind of thing. So there was this Forbes article which talked about the ages of a women's career. So it talked about in the 20s having the ambition, in the 30s having that culture shock that things are not going the way you want it to go for various reasons. And in the 40s, it's some kind of a reacceleration. And it talked about 50 plus as self-actualization space. Now, those timelines can be shifted because we're talking about 100-year life now. So I think definitely seeing that reacceleration and that self-actualization piece now, how do you soak up things? How do you gather information from the ecosystem and apply it? And when we were in, I'm sure this is something similar to yours, when we were in high school and all that, there's an emphasis on learning and using big words. And you would get a lot of full marks in school because you actually made something very complex.
Correct.
But in the real world, after school, you realize sometimes how useless that is.
Absolutely.
Knowing big words, fancy Latin names, all that is complex language. It's very neat. It's cool. But basically, smart people are the ones who are able to actually make that complicated process simple while you're preserving the nuance of it. I mean, and Indra Nooyi calls it a hip pocket skill. So which is what I do today as storytelling for outcomes, where you create a messaging which is simple, which is memorable, which is sticky and impactful. So really my big, hairy, audacious goal is to help leaders and teams drive those business outcomes, build their personal brand, and be more human at work through coaching and storytelling.
Amazing, amazing. So let's talk about your avatar as a storytelling coach. How do you define the role of storytelling for the big CEOs and CXOs?
Right. And I think this is very relevant today. Piku Iyer famously said that in the age of content providers on every side, round the clock, what we're really crying out often silently is for context providers. So storytelling in business is all about purposely and deliberately and systematically applying some of the story techniques in an organization so that you're delivering business outcomes. And today it's a human skill. So we are talking about 3 C's, right? Communicate, communicate, and communicate.
Correct.
And storytelling is the best way to do it. I remember John Flint, who used to be the past CEO of HSBC based out of Hong Kong. He said that towards the course of his 30-year career or so, he must have produced 2 million PowerPoints, and nobody remembers a word of what he said in those.
Correct.
But towards the course of his career, he also shared a lot of stories of his highs, lows, what happened, and failures and things like that. And people still connect with him and talk to him about it.
Absolutely.
So really, when you're like fighting for that attention, you're fighting for comprehension, for people to understand you the way what you're saying and implement it in an organization. And you want them to retain it so that they take it forward and talk to their teams. So the messaging is consistent. And that is what, you're really looking for leaders who are able to carry those examples.
Correct.
Need not be just personal stories. It could be something that happened elsewhere, which you're taking and sharing.
Yeah.
And, I remember this whole, I think it was November 2015. There was a panel discussion at an APEC summit on climate change. And this was in Manila in the Philippines. Barack Obama was asking Jack Ma about why he thinks there's a need for this conversation on climate change. And Jack Ma replies saying, it's not a passion, it's actually a concern or worry for me. When I was 12 years old, I went to swim in a lake and I almost died in the lake. It was very deep. 5 years ago, I went to that lake and it was totally dry. So it's not really about, just working with something or not working with something. Are you creating a healthy environment?
Right.
It's about really investing in climate change.
Well said. And you're so right. Storytelling, anecdotes are things that people remember. And it's a very, very powerful way of communicating your own viewpoint. But, let me now move to personal branding. And, storytelling is also a very important part of personal branding. Tell me about the work that you do when you support an individual for her or his personal brand.
Yeah. No, thanks so much. I mean, because this is essential, like you said, they link up pretty well, right? Yeah. We remember people because of, and I think Jeff Bezos famously said about, personal branding is what people talk about you when you're not in the room.
Correct.
I'm just twisting that a little bit to say that personal branding is the stories people tell about you when you're not in the room. That's the impression and impact that you are leaving on people. So again, at a broad level, especially in organizations, you want to communicate well in the online and offline and hybrid space. You want to maintain alignment across your shareholders. You want to cascade messages across the organization. And in all this, personal branding really helps you stand apart. We are like, we all have a brand, whether we acknowledge it or not.
Absolutely.
Somebody will say you're kind, you're knowledgeable, you're purpose-driven, you're a podcaster, you're competitive, you're impatient, poor in time management, argumentative. There are all these words, right? Correct. And sometimes some of these words do more harm than good.
Absolutely.
So steering yourself towards, just like how you use a gaming controller and move across, how can you steer your brand towards the outcomes and image that you want to leave with the people?
True.
And that's where it really comes in and goes live on. And people want, especially when you're looking at organizations level, people are looking at what do you bring to the table for the team? Are you an individual contributor? Are you somebody who can work across teams? So people are constantly looking at, if I promote this person, what are they going to be able to influence the team? Correct. Are they going to be able to bring their ideas to the table? Is the team going to listen to them? What's the kind of person that they are? And can they drive outcomes because of that?
Well said.
Personal branding really helps with that.
Well said. And yet, Soundari, the problem that I've seen with many, many professional leaders is that the view is, let my work speak for itself. Why do I have to speak? I'd love to get your perspective on at what stage or how much should one speak about the work that you're doing, because everything that you're doing is building into your personal brand.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, there's a cultural element to this. I was running a couple of workshops in Chennai and then in Mumbai for an organization. And I could see the difference even within there when I asked, what is stopping you from doing X, Y, Z? And, oh, no, we've been told from childhood that we should not talk about ourselves, our work. Silently put your head down and go ahead and do things. And it doesn't matter. And so on and so forth. And in Mumbai, the versions were slightly different. It was not so much about cultural, but it was a question of time. So we come up with different reasons. So there's a cultural element to it.
Correct.
But I think Scott Galloway, the NYU professor, he talks about round-the-clock positioning. Think of yourself as if you're buying a brand or somebody is interacting with you, a client is interacting with you. They want to know pre-purchase, what is the kind of branding that you're bringing? Who's the person I'm going to interact with? During the course of the interaction with the client, as you're implementing a project, as you're working with them, they are getting a sense of you as a person. And the post-purchase stage, which is after the project is implemented, are you still being with the client, hand-holding, delivering outcomes, looking at future projects? So it's actually round the clock.
Well said.
So your person, it's not just at this stage or that stage, you're really bringing yourself the whole time.
And at what stage of one's career, and I know you said that it should be 24/7, but at what stage of one's career does one start actually saying, now is the time for me to start talking about or becoming a thought leader? And what are your views?
I think, again, it's every stage, because we're talking about people who, let's say if you're talking about the millennials or Gen Z or whatever the alphabet is afterwards, which comes, everybody comes with an opinion. They come with a life experience.
Correct.
You're sharing your lived experience. So any time is a good time to do that.
Okay.
And definitely within organizations, as you navigate work cultures and environments, those in charge of promotion decisions are looking at this. So it is not just at the beginning stage or a middle stage or, oh, now I need to be senior enough for me to be a thought leader. I'm not going with the terminology, what even is a thought leader. All of us are leading with our thoughts, hopefully, in that sense. But I think really it helps us connect to people in the organization, build that personal connection. More than anything else. So it's something that you need to do all the time, whether you're an individual contributor, then maybe you can write articles where you are, again, going to your thing on the books, part of it. How are you just sharing your experiences with the world? So somebody benefits from it.
Well said.
So I always think about give, share, help. How are you working on those verticals? And I think there's room for it. And in some ways, the cultural element then is removed. Your shyness can go away a little bit. You're not thinking that I'm projecting myself, but I'm actually helping somebody.
Well said. And, my next question is that when you work with somebody to work on their personal brand or support them as a storytelling coach, what are some of the factors you look at and the steps you take to be able to carve out the person or the individual that you're hoping will be perceived differently?
I mean, let's say let me talk about, on the storytelling side.
Yeah.
For instance, so again, I was talking to a group of mentors around this on how do you as mentors really become relatable? Because one of the things that, we used to get irritated with our aunts and uncles saying, oh, in my days, this is how it used to happen.
Yes.
And then, and then start off with
I used to swim across the river to go to school.
Yeah. We lived without ACs. I think you have to have a relevant conversation. Yeah. So even when you're sharing something which is a personal story example, you want to be relevant. You want to be relatable. So just for example, it's World Cup season now. You want to talk about how people need to be resilient in their life. You can just make a spiel around it, saying we all need to be resilient. It's important to do this, important to do that. Eyes are going to glaze over totally. So instead, you could talk about, say, just for example, the Belgian player, Romelu Lukaku. Sadly, they've exited the World Cup, but, he talks about his life growing up, recalling his memories as a 6-year-old in Antwerp. They would go 3 weeks without electricity. They would use a cup of kettle boiled water. That's all they got to wash themselves. And he says that I remember this very moment when it struck me that we've become broke. He came from school home one day and they used to normally have bread and milk. That was like the food. And he didn't think much about it. He didn't even know what other options were there. He thought that's all the food people have. You have bread and milk for lunch. And he saw his mom standing by the refrigerator and she was opening milk bottle and adding something, shaking it, and then she was serving it. It took her a minute to realize that she was actually adding water to the milk because they couldn't afford to even buy that milk.
Wow.
And he says that that day I decided that I'm going to do everything in my power to make a better life for all of us. So when you share something like this, it's relevant. It's something which is immediate and that's happening. And you're not becoming preachy. But more importantly, I mean, I want to ask you this, Ashutosh. You can visualize, right? What are some of the visuals that will stay with you from this?
Correct. Well said. And, it's so important for everyone to be able to understand what their own strengths are, what are the areas that they want to be able to project and talk about, and how do you invest in it. And I think you're probably supporting them in really being able to flower in each of these areas. I think that's quite amazing. My next question to you, Soundari, is that in your view, is it necessary to have a behavioral change to position yourself as a personal brand?
Yeah, I think, constantly Adam Grant is one of, I'm sure, a lot of our favorite authors. He talks about a habits audit, right? In his book, Think Again, on how do you really, in a turbulent world, there's a set of cognitive skills that may be there, but it's your ability to rethink and unlearn, which is going to be, and I think that's a precursor for any learning. How do you unlearn? And that behavioral change is very key. So let's say we are talking about even something as going online. We are all now used to Zoom, but you still see the occasional Zoom bloopers. But also you're trying to build that connection and interaction on a platform like Zoom. So how do you really stay upright, lean in, so lean forward and be open so that you're receiving information? So it's called the UFO part. One of my friends, he called it the UFO thing. So I mean, that is a behavioral change. You might be otherwise on a call where the video is not on, or even in the office, you might be slouching on your chair like this or doing something. You're making a change. You're showing that you're fully present for whoever you're interacting with. In an organization, as a CEO, as a leader, you're still coming across as a person, who's really listening, who's mindful, who's not multitasking on different devices. But who's like really being present. So as you move from, say, meetings to meetings, how do you breathe, connect, land, and be more present? That's a behavioral change.
Very interesting.
So when you're looking at an online space or offline space, and that's part of your brand. Somebody is going to go around and that's the stories you create. Oh, I was in this conversation with Ashutosh. When I walked in, he was sitting and, looking at messages on his mobile. But the minute he saw me, he put his mobile aside and he gave me his full attention. And that's going to be a story about your brand that's going to cascade around. And these are those small moments. They're called the sliding door moments. Where, like the lift doors are closing, somebody puts their hand to open the door for you. So that's where trust is built.
Well said. And the other part, and I have time for two more questions. My next question to you, Soundari, is on a perceived conflict of your company's brand with your personal brand. Many people have told me that maybe I should work on my personal brand when I have retired. And I said, no, that's not correct. What are your thoughts?
I feel, we bring all our avatars with us. There is no one avatar that when I go into work, I leave it in my cabinet, I stuck it in my house cupboard and go away. We are talking about how can you be authentic and bring your whole self to work.
Correct.
Right. So the same thing about personalities and all that. And I think about Arundhati Bhattacharya. She talks about in her life how a lot of these moments really created, and she shares that authentically. She says that things like, small things. When she joined Salesforce, the average age of the person in Salesforce was like 30. In State Bank, it was 47. And she says, I joined Salesforce and I've upped the average for them already.
Yes.
It's light banter, but really bringing yourself for what it is. She says again, people, when I was in if you remember the visual of Arundhati Bhattacharya, saris all the time in State Bank, Salesforce, she's wearing trousers and jackets. There would have been so many people carrying the bags for her in State Bank. Here she puts on a backpack and she walks and she goes and she says, this is a totally new space for me. I have so much that I have to learn. So I ask a lot of questions. I may look stupid sometimes, but I need to learn. And, she says that I've even picked up the requisite vocabulary around this. She calls it G for G, which is go for growth, which is the low. So I think we have to really put ourselves out at all stages. Again, be that authentic person. There is some bit of values from home which shape you. My dad grew up in a village and he moved to Chennai and he was a self-taught person. He had this focus on learning. He learned new skills and then he became so good at it that he became the go-to person. My mom at 70 started using her iPad and she's on YouTube and Facebook and she's, and this gives her a way to stay in touch with her grandchildren as well.
Yeah.
So if I say that I have lifelong learning as my mentality, it's come from some of this. I can't take that away and park it when I come to work.
Very interesting.
I'm not going to put another avatar and role and say, now I won't talk about this. That is what it is. But all of these shape you, right?
Well
so you can't remove those influences.
Well said, well said. And my last question to you now, Soundari, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own amazing journey across the corporate world as a storytelling coach and so many other things that you're doing, what would you say are 3 lessons or 3 learnings you want our viewers and listeners to take away from our conversation?
I mean, Sam, I also like a lot of sayings, but one important thought I want to leave with them is how you show up as leaders, as people will trigger stories. And those will touch life and create impact. So be mindful of what you're doing. And we are seeing a lot of that negative space in the world today. So how can you be the person who's changing it? The second piece is if you're shackled to who you are now, you can't recognize and reach for who you might become next. So really constantly keep updating your dreams.
Yeah.
Don't get fixated with your abilities and what you can do today. You can be something much, much bigger. So, update your dreams.
Correct.
And the third part of it is something that I really love from a personal branding point of view, because we see so many powerful people. We see so many interesting people. We can get really carried away by thinking, oh, what am I going to do? Where is my role? So there's a beautiful poem by Antonio Machado called Traveler, There Is No Road. You make your own path as you walk. So make your own path, create your own groove.
Yeah.
And it'll be great.
Wonderful. And on that note, Soundari, and your 3 amazing lessons, be mindful of what you are doing, keep updating your dreams. And the most important one, which you said, yes, the third was make your own path. Don't get too carried away with what you see others achieving or doing. Thank you so much for speaking to me. I'm so amazed and impressed with how easily you were quoting so many different people and how easily you were interspersing your responses with such amazing quotes. You're obviously a person who reads a lot and not only reads, but even remembers. And I'm reasonably certain if I was to come and have a look at some of your books, you probably have them either highlighted or underlined. But thank you for speaking to me about storytelling, about personal branding, and about all the wonderful tips you've given to us. Thank you again and good luck.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure, Ashutosh. And I look forward to listening to your other episodes and learning from that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called you.